When someone dies today, you know exactly what happens next. There are phone calls to make, there are people who come and take the body away, there are forms, arrangements, services. The entire process is handled by professionals you have never met, following rules that have existed for longer than anyone alive can remember. You don't have to think about it. You don't have to decide anything. The system takes over and you just follow it. Now take all of that away. Every rule, every professional, every tradition, every piece of guidance anyone has ever given you about what death means and what you are supposed to do when it arrives. What are you left with? A body and a choice. That is exactly where ancient humans stood, every single time. And what they chose, what different groups of people across hundreds of thousands of years decided to do with their dead, covers a range so wide and so dark that it will fundamentally change the picture you have in your head. The cave in Spain is called Cima de los Huesos. In English, that translates to the pit of bones. To reach it, you have to descend nearly 30 meters underground through a narrow vertical shaft. It is not a place anyone would end up by accident. Researchers have been excavating it since the 1970s, and what they have pulled out of that pit has rewritten the timeline of human behavior around death. 28 individuals, men, women, children, their bones mixed together in a single deposit at the bottom of a shaft that goes nowhere. No tools found with them, no food remains, no signs of habitation, just the dead, carried deliberately into the dark and dropped. The leading theory is that this was intentional disposal, a chosen place for the dead, which means that 430,000 years ago, long before Homo sapiens existed, something that looked roughly like us had already decided that a dead body was not just a problem to solve, it was something that deserved a specific response. That is extraordinary, but it is also just the beginning. Because here is what researchers started asking once they found Cima de los Huesos. If this group was carrying their dead underground on purpose, what were other groups doing? And when they looked at the full archaeological record across hundreds of sites and hundreds of thousands of years, the answer was not what anyone wanted to find. At a site called Gough's Cave in Somerset, England, archaeologists found human bones dating to around 14,700 years ago. The bones had been carefully, deliberately, and skillfully processed. Cut marks ran along the skulls where the scalp had been removed. The brain had been extracted. The long bones had been cracked open and the marrow scraped out. And then, in what may be the detail that stays with you longest, the skulls had been shaped, smoothed around the edges, worked into cups. Someone had sat with a human skull and turned it into a drinking vessel. And this was not one person. The remains of at least 7 individuals were processed this way. This was not desperation. This was method. Now, the immediate question is whether this was cannibalism. And the evidence strongly suggests that in some cases, yes, it was. Cut marks on human bones that match the same marks found on butchered animal bones at the same sites have been documented across multiple locations in prehistoric Europe and beyond. Human bones found in the same refuse piles as animal food waste. Marrow extraction identical to what was done with deer and horse bones at the same fire. The people doing this were not starving. The animal bones at these sites show a population with access to food, which means the consumption of human remains was a choice, a ritual, a cultural practice with a meaning we can only partially reconstruct. But cannibalism is only one piece of what the record shows. Across prehistoric Europe and Asia, researchers have found evidence of what is called skull curation, the deliberate keeping and sometimes decorating of human skulls long after death. At Herxheim in Germany, a site dating to around 7,000 years ago, the remains of hundreds of individuals were found. The bones had been systematically defleshed, the skulls treated differently from the rest of the body, and the remains deposited in a way that suggests organized, repeated ritual rather than isolated incident. Someone kept coming back. Someone kept doing this over and over with care and with purpose. And here is where the story does something that nobody expects, because everything described so far points in one direction, toward darkness, toward something that feels alien and deeply uncomfortable. But the full picture is not that simple, and the part that complicates everything is, in some ways, more disturbing than the skulls. In northern Iraq, at a site called Shanidar Cave, archaeologists found the skeleton of a Neanderthal man who had survived to what was, for his time and species, an extraordinary age. His right arm had been amputated above the elbow, either by injury or deliberate removal, long before his death. His eye socket showed evidence of a healed injury that had likely left him partially blind. His leg had been injured and healed. He was, by every physical measure, a man who could not have survived alone. And he did not die alone. He died in a cave, surrounded by people who had, for years, kept him alive despite the fact that he contributed nothing to the hunt, nothing to the food supply, nothing to the group's physical survival. They kept him alive anyway. And when he died, something was placed around his body. Pollen evidence, though debated among researchers, suggests flowers may have been deliberately placed in that grave. Whether or not that specific detail holds, the physical care of his body is not in question. He was buried, deliberately, in a position that required someone to arrange him. Someone took the time. So here is what the full record actually shows. Ancient humans did not have one relationship with death. They had many. Across time and across geography, different groups made radically different choices. Some kept skulls as objects of meaning. Some consumed the dead in rituals we cannot fully decode. And some carried injured companions for years, buried them with care, and placed objects in their graves that suggest a belief in something beyond the moment of death. The darkness and the tenderness existed at the same time. Sometimes in the same culture, sometimes possibly in the same group. And that combination, the capacity for both, is not a contradiction. It is the most human thing in this entire story. Back in that cave in Spain, 430,000 years ago, someone carried a body down a 30-meter shaft in total darkness and left it there. We do not know why. We do not know what they believed. We do not know if they grieved. But they went to the effort. In the dark, with no one watching, with nothing to gain, they carried their dead somewhere specific and left them with intention. That is the oldest thing we know about how humans respond to losing someone. And it turns out that was only the beginning of how strange and how human that response would become.